approaching divers, clasping them with their tentacles and their suckers, and holding them until they drown. Except that's not what's really happening here. This octopus is, if anything, curious about what this strange creature is. It's using its delicate sense of touch to get some clues. It can pull a mouthpiece off, but it doesn't try to keep it. When it knows what it needs to know, whatever that is, it disappears into the depths. The question we can answer, though, is what do we know about it? About all octopuses? Well, all other kinds, of course, are smaller than the giant octopus, and being soft-bodied, too, they're usually hiding out of the way of large fish and sea mammals. And when they do go out to hunt, they do it in camouflage. This helps, but no camouflage is perfect, and an octopus isn't the only creature in the sea to use it. A scorpion fish, and an octopus that was just too big for it. Hunting can be almost as dangerous for the octopus as for the animals it's stalking. One mortal enemy is the moray eel, which sets up ambushes. It may be hard to tell who's winning this fight, but in a sense, they both are. The eel gets an arm to eat, but the octopus will still survive intact. Small blood vessels in the stump automatically cauterize themselves, and in a couple of months, the arm will just grow back. Scientists who study octopuses sometimes simulate attacks to observe their range of defenses. A poke with a camera brings an instant spurt of ink. The cloud acts as a decoy, while the octopus takes off in the opposite direction. If that doesn't work, it tries shock tactics, turning deathly white and spewing out another smokescreen of ink. The ink, by the way, isn't just a visual weapon. It also tastes bad, and is enough in itself to put most predators off the whole idea of eating octopus. If nothing else, an octopus is flexible. Not having any bones in its body, it can change into different shapes and fit into impossible-looking places. This beer bottle, for instance. The top hardly looks big enough to get a couple of arms through, much less the whole animal. But in fact, the only limit on an octopus's ability to squeeze is the size of its solid jaw. Easy. And safe. Through no intention of their own, octopuses sometimes end up in another kind of glass container. But once in a tank, they seem to adjust all right.
See how they suck?
This giant Pacific octopus is part of the display at the Seattle Aquarium, where people can come in off the street and have the mesmerizing deep-sea experience of looking an octopus in the eye. And there is something about octopus eyes. They're roughly the same size as human eyes and seem to look right at you. They're the only thing that's remotely human-like about octopuses. Octopuses can see about as well as humans, but their main sense is touch. This octopus has more than 1,600 suckers, each as sensitive as a tongue. In each sucker's skin are 3 kinds of cells. Some feel stretch and some pressure, but most detect chemicals, which is exactly what the taste buds do. These so-called taste-sensitive cells have tufts of hair in them that waft in the water and collect telltale chemicals. Every sucker has about 10,000 taste cells, which means that every octopus arm has more than 2 million. Altogether, there are more sense cells and nerves in an octopus's body than in its brain.
See, now he's breathing.
As nervous systems go, this is seriously advanced. But octopuses are close relatives of some of the most nerveless-looking creatures in nature. The mollusks, clams, slugs, and snails. The mollusks and the octopuses, squid, and cuttlefish share an ancestor, a plain, pin-brained, not very spectacular limpet. 500 million years ago, the ancestral limpets made a living on the seabed, taking whatever scraps came their way. They were very slow-moving, with only their shells between them and their predators. But in time, their shells developed gas-filled chambers, and their lives gained a 3rd dimension. They could float away from danger. 200 million years later, and the shells had been refined into lots of new shapes, spirals of all sizes from a few inches across to several feet. These were the ammonites, and the seas thronged with them. Their shells are among the most common fossils found today, but what their soft parts were like, nobody is quite sure. They probably swam like this modern creature, a nautilus. Modern, but it's been around for 450 million years, which is 100 million years longer than its ammonite cousins lasted. Powerful predators chipped away at their numbers, until climate change probably wiped them out. They left the oceans to this animal, one with tentacles for grabbing prey, and a long muscular body with a shell inside. The faster and more agile belemnite, a great uncle of all the squid. All 400 species of them, from the tiny eastern Pacific opalescent squid, just a few inches long, to bruisers such as the 6-foot Humboldt squid. Humboldts are voracious eaters that will attack almost anything they see, their skin flashing like neon signs as they feed. Squid in general are much more like fish than any of their mollusk relations, and they're more athletic than octopuses and cuttlefish. Their streamlined, torpedo-shaped bodies are almost pure muscle. They can swim as fast as some birds fly. Like an octopus, a squid has 8 arms, but for extra grip, it also has 2 long prey-grabbing tentacles. Squid also have triangular fins for balance and steering, and a remnant of the belemnite's internal shell. It's so much of a remnant, though, that there's nothing shell-like about it. A flimsy, transparent, plasticky blade that just helps to stiffen the squid's long, floppy body. The body itself is a cylinder of muscle with a hollow core because it's a jet engine. The squid sucks water in through a hole near its head, and then by clenching its muscles, pushes it out through a siphon tube. And the siphon is directional. Depending on where it's pointed, the squid can move up, down, sideways, forward, or backwards. Not all squid are jazzy swimmers, though. There's a stubby little one, for instance, named Rossia, whose fins are more like shovels than sails. And are, in fact, used for digging in the sandy bottom, where it waits to surprise passing prey. The squid's cousin, the cuttlefish, has a single long fin rippling from the back of its head to its tail. This is an excellent stabilizer and allows for underwater acrobatics. A cuttlefish can even hover motionless like a helicopter. This animal also has a structure on the inside which evolved from a shell. The porous cuttlebone keeps the animal afloat, while the fin and the jet put it through its maneuvers. Octopuses don't have a shell in any shape or form, and they're not good floaters. What they are mainly is walkers. They use their arms as legs to bump along the seabed. They've still got the family jet, though, and from time to time they do use it. From a walk, an octopus can take off like Superman. The arms become rudders, and the head becomes a kind of prow. This is mainly an escape technique, usually used when the octopus needs to zip fast as a fish back to the safety of its den. Some dens, though, don't feel very safe. If, for instance, the opening is too big, the octopus does something that looks intelligent. It blocks it up. But is this intelligence? Dr. Jean Boll studies the way octopuses learn and behave.
When they go in their dens, they pull rocks and objects in front of the opening to block off and make themselves feel safer. And some people have argued that this is a sort of tool use, using objects to protect themselves, and therefore it's a sign that octopuses are intelligent. I'm not so sure that it is. Complex behavior and intelligent behavior are not quite the same thing. You can have complex behavior that's fixed. It's the same every single time. And most people would not consider that particularly intelligent. Octopuses certainly have complex behavior and have lots of different behaviors, but whether it's intelligent or not, I think remains to be seen. Most people who keep them as pets tend to think of them as very, very intelligent. They appear to look you straight in the eye, which is very endearing to human beings. They are responsive to you as the pet owner and feed them, and they come to you, and some of them, when they're accustomed to you, would even meet your finger on the glass, and they do things that we would interpret as intelligent because we would use intelligence to do them.
Intelligent or not, octopuses can do some things that seem pretty smart. Escaping from their tanks, for instance. Keeping them in isn't always easy. Because whatever their brain power, they're certainly strong. A 1-pound octopus can lift a 40-pound aquarium lid. That's like a man lifting a boxcar. And that's only the beginning of the adventure.
There's some remarkable stories about how octopuses can unscrew jars to get crabs, or there's even a story that an octopus climbs out of an aquarium, walks down the block into another aquarium to get a fish, and then comes home again. I don't think there's any actual substantiation for these stories. It's true that some octopuses can pull a rubber plug or bung out of a jar, to get a crab inside. But
This, after all, is the softest of soft-bodied animals, attacking one of the hardest, with lethal claws attached. First, the octopus stalks the crab, waiting until it can pounce from behind, away from the claws. A quick leap and a grab with the suckers, and the octopus pulls the crab to its mouth at the hub of the arms. Then the octopus uses its only hard part, its parrot-like beak, to bite the crab at its only soft part, the membrane where the hard parts meet. Next, it paralyzes the crab with nerve venom, dissolves its muscle with saliva, pulls the shell open, and sucks out the liquefied flesh, leaving behind a perfectly clean plate. Octopuses will eat almost anything, and they eat a lot. Every day, an octopus gains up to 2% of its body weight, the equivalent of a human gaining 4 pounds a day. Sometimes an octopus fishes with its net, the webbing between its arms. It pounces on a piece of coral, traps all the small creatures there in the web, and then scratches around in the net to see what it's got. In their pursuit of prey, octopuses sometimes even leave the water. That doesn't mean they can breathe air, though. This Australian species, which hunts in the shallows of reefs, has to slip into pools from time to time so it can use its gills. And in or out of the water, having 8 arms means that an octopus can kill things that are larger than itself. Usually, only animals that hunt in packs can do that. So an octopus amounts to a one-animal pack. When the octopus has eaten its fill, it goes home to its den. Not as straightforward a proposition as it sounds, because how does the octopus know where it is in relation to the den? Octopus researchers have shown that the animal recognizes landmarks, and no matter how far, wide, and meandering its foray has been, it goes home in a straight line. Which means it must have some kind of a seabed map in its head. Gene Boll tests this idea by putting octopuses in mazes and finding out if they can tell right from left.
well, this is the maze. There are 2 choices. The octopus can either go to the right or to the left. The left hole is actually blocked off, although you can't tell right now, while this hole is open, and it's up to the octopus to figure out which way to go. I'll be watching the whole thing from a camera overhead, because if I stay in sight, the octopus will watch me rather than pay attention to which way to go. So here it goes. The octopus is in the house, and it will drop out now because it's out of the water. This octopus hates shallow water and it hates bright light, so it's going to try to find the open burrow. He can't see very far because he's low to the ground, so he can't tell ahead of time that that hole is blocked off. So he's exploring slowly and carefully around the outside edge. For the first time, it takes an octopus anywhere up to 10 minutes to find the open hole. But it looks like this octopus is moving quite quickly, because there he goes now. He's just found it.
That was that octopus's first trial. Each animal runs through the maze 20, 30, or 40 times. And with experience, the octopuses do get quicker. And that at least suggests learning.
We do know that they're capable of quite complex behaviors of all kinds, including spatial orientation behavior. But we don't know yet, and it's going to take a lot more experimentation to determine whether they're intelligent in the sense that we mean intelligence for ourselves.
There are several ways of judging an animal's intelligence. One is by the intricacy of its communication skills. And this animal, the cuttlefish, is a veritable Shakespeare. Except that it doesn't speak with words, but with patterns. Those stripes rippling across the back of a male cuttlefish are telling another male where to go, away. The rippler has found a female and is staking his claim. It's the known as chromatophores, tens of thousands of tiny color cells in the skin. Each chromatophore is like a bag of pigment at the center of spokes of muscles. When the nerves relax the muscles, the bag contracts and wrinkles into ridges and grooves. But when the muscles pull, the bag stretches out, revealing the pigments in all their glory. Basically, there are only 4 colors in the chromatophores: black, brown, red, and yellow. But the timing of their opening and closing, probably the most important use of the patterns for cuttlefish and octopuses, is disguise, that and being in the open at the same time. Cuttlefish camouflage is the specialty of Dr. John Messenger.
Well, what we've got here is an animal over a gravelly bottom. He is almost uniform, half closing your eyes. You can see something which has quite a good intensity match to the background. Now he's coming over the gravel and you're getting the white spots up very nicely. The pattern he's showing is somewhere between mottle and stipple. He's also erecting muscle in the skin, so it gives the skin a spiky appearance.
So the cuttlefish is changing its skin's color and texture. It gets that mottled effect by way of another kind of skin cell, the leucophore, which is covered in tiny white lumps. When light hits these, it's scattered and reflected back much whiter, making pale patches on the cuttlefish's skin. Sometimes the effect is geometric.
Well, here we've got an animal which is on a much more variegated background. What he's doing is now generating very bold and big patterns, squares and stripes, which completely break up the overall outline of the animal.
In really murky water, you'd have no idea what this animal was, or even that it was an animal. But how does it know what patterns to create? How does a cuttlefish see its world? John Messenger has been experimenting with colored gravel.
Well, here we've got a cuttlefish sitting on an artificial seabed, and if you look at him, you'll see that he is very pale, and it's not a bad brightness match. The eye is evidently looking down at the white stones at the bottom of the tank, not at the green wall at the side. They're always looking at the bottom. Well, we're now going to lift up this barrier and hope we can persuade this animal to move across onto a much darker background. I shall tickle him rather gently, like this, and he's beginning to move across, and I think at once you can see he's turned very dark.
One important point about this cuttlefish, it can't even see red. It's colorblind. It sees white, black, and shades of gray. But it sees them very precisely and can tell from the subtle contrasts between the grays exactly how to blend in. Sometimes, though, the contrast is a little too subtle.
Here we've got a cuttlefish on a white background with red stones. That's as you and I see it. As he sees it, he's on a white background with some very dark stone. So it isn't a uniform background, it's a pattern background. And look at the animal himself, you can see he's patterned. He's got some spots on the mantle bar across the head and other things. It's a definite pattern. He's decided that background isn't uniform. This one now, very obvious difference to us with colour vision, blue and yellow, but in fact these stones were chosen because they're intensity matched. They are the same brightness. To this colourblind animal, they are no different. They're equal sorts of grey. And so what does he do? He puts on no pattern at all. He's a rather uniform stipple, which he hopes is the best way to match what he sees as a uniform background.
But how can a colorblind animal, and octopuses are colorblind too, possibly camouflage itself against all sorts of colors in the wild. This looks like magic. An octopus disappears into the pinks and purples of a coral reef. And this looks like something from nothing. One rises out of the blues and greens of eelgrass. It's done with yet another kind of skin cell, the iridophore. Instead of generating color, iridophores contain stacks of reflective discs that act as prisms. They split the surrounding light and cover the octopus in blues and greens. The blue rings of the blue-ringed octopus are also done with iridophores, only not for camouflage. They're meant to be seen. They're a skull and crossbones, a venom warning. A 1-ounce blue-ringed octopus carries enough poison to paralyze 10 people. Squid have iridophores too, but shaped more like ribbons than discs. They also reflect and split light and give squid the silvery, bluey rings around their eyes, making them less conspicuous, the opposite of eyeliner. And the eyes are big because vision is vital to the animal, never mind the color blindness. Squid's eyes are well developed and far apart for a wide field of view. So wide, in fact, that a squid can almost see in front and behind at the same time. And it's seldom taken in by tricks of light. That's because its eyes are fixed with something like polarizing filters. This enemy barracuda, for instance, counts on its prey losing it in the glare of the sky. This squid isn't fooled, though. The eyes adjust and sift out the rays that could cause confusion and see what they need to see in unambiguous black and white. The squid see the threat and then do something about it. They change their skin pattern and disappear against the foliage. The way squid defend themselves has been studied by Dr. Roger Hanlon.
The primary defense of squids is camouflage, and they do a masterful job of this. If they go down low near the soft corals, they can match the shape and the general color and texture of these corals very well indeed. If they're aimed up, they can put a banding pattern across the bottom that matches the bands of the gorgonian. So they can look exactly like whatever shape the gorgonian is. Predators just don't see them. When camouflage fails, that is when the predator actually sees the squid and they move close in to begin the attack sequence, squids do something totally different. They go into their secondary defense. And in this case, they may look unlike a squid by putting 2 false eye spots on the other side of the body so that the predator doesn't know which way they're going to jet, forward or backward. The squid may then raise its arms in a startle display that will stop the forward movement of the predator. And in that critical moment, it will then go into the next phase of secondary defense, which is to blanch ink and jet away at very rapid speed, leaving only this ink pseudomorph of a squid. And of course, the predator then bites into that ink and gets no squid whatsoever and rather a bad flavor as well. It's interesting that octopuses have a similar system. That is, they have the primary defense of camouflage, which they do very well, and they have the same sequence of secondary defenses too. Here in the Caymans, we were able to study this octopus defensive behavior for the first time ever. And it was very nice indeed because we were able to act as the predators so that no harm came to the octopus, but we were still able to see the full repertoire of secondary defenses. And it came out very well indeed.
Dr. Hanlon and his team have been seeing some of these defenses for the first time ever. They video the octopuses, and at the end of each day, they play back what they've seen and go over it in detail.
Is that up on your lens?
Is that a fence?
Right on the lens. So what happens is the animal has tried all its defensive maneuvers, and the last thing it does is go on the offense, leap on the predator or the camera. Now you can see the suckers moving right across the dome port on the lens. You never know what they're going to do next. Now this, I think, is a brilliant example of stealth. We call it the moving rock or the moving algae. The octopus takes up the posture and looks like a rock and moves just slowly enough not to be detected for movement, but it looks like one of the other rocks right in the picture. Meanwhile, they move away from the predator. Soon they get enough distance and they're gone.
So now we're into defensive.
This is the secondary defense. Exactly.
Okay.
Cripps has failed to take off. He's only about maybe 1 foot. Not very big animal. So they change from camouflage to big and bright. So they look bigger than they really are. That's part of the idea, is to stop the predator.
Is that the ink that they shoot out?
Yeah, so the ink comes flying out, and the predator usually takes a bite of the ink. Here's the other trick they do. There he is right there.
Whoa, boy, that's quite a difference.
So that's the startle threat, and then jet away and ink in your face.
It's amazing.
We want to go back to see what happened.
Sure, that'd be great.
Okay, now here is ultimate crypsis. The animal is just a part of the rock at the bottom. It's absolutely invisible. Then look at this change. Magnificent startle threat behavior and ink and jet.
And he's still inking. Lots of ink, eh?
Now this we have never seen before. This is the ultimate startle display when the animal is cornered. And it gets this face that we've never seen before. It looks like an owl or a ghost or whatever. And we think it's sort of the ultimate threat display once the predator is really in close. Looks totally unlike an octopus whatsoever. And that's the whole idea. I'm not an octopus, don't mess with me.
The signal is simple and clear and could be understood by almost any other animal. But when octopus, cuttlefish, and squid are communicating among themselves, things get complicated. Caribbean reef squid, for instance, have a very sophisticated courtship. Here, a male in the center has picked out a female and is trying to isolate her from the rest of the shoal. But by turning white, the female makes it clear that she's not ready for mating. Not yet, and not necessarily with him in particular. The whiteness is also a signal to the other males that she's still available. The male, in turn, blanches at them, but only on the side of his body that they can see and she can't. A rival male comes too close, and a fight starts. While they, in their squid way, slug it out, the female goes back to the shoal to see if she can find a better male. And the original male, having won his fight, goes after her again. At first, she seems reluctant, but after all, he has won a fight and will probably have fight-winning offspring. So she accepts him, and they court, swimming fast, side by side. The actual mating is done in a blink. The male reaches out and sticks a packet of sperm on her head or arms. She then picks it up and tucks it into a storage organ near her mouth. Sperm can remain there inactive for many months. Reef squid courtship can be pretty hectic sometimes, but it's almost calm compared to another species, the opalescent squid. There's a full moon off the California coast. The opalescents gather in shoals of thousands, their translucent bodies glowing in the moonlight. All through the shoal, females are being grabbed by males, whose arms flush red as they mate with them. Once a male has a female in his clutches, he holds on tight. All around, there are unattached males who, in their frustration, will sometimes even resort to ramming a mating pair. And sometimes ramming works. Even if a female is being held for all she's worth, a ram raider can still fertilize her. In studying another species with this kind of mating system, scientists have found females laying eggs fertilized by a whole lot of different males. And there are a whole lot of eggs, up to 55,000 per mother. They're left in large communal nurseries, in capsules anchored in the sand. When the young squid hatch, there will only be other young squid around them. Having reproduced and finished their mission in life, the older generation will have died. By and large, squid, cuttlefish, and octopuses are not long-lived animals. A year is a lifetime for most of them. There's one octopus, though, that breaks the records. It's found 600 feet down in the cold, dark waters around the North Pole. It's the Arctic octopus, and it lives for 6 years. It's tiny, too, about the size of a golf ball. But in one way, it's the biggest octopus in the sea. In proportion to its body, the male has the largest sexual organ of any octopus. It's at the tip of the third right arm. No one knows for sure why it needs to be so big, and until scientists can spend more time 600 feet deep in the Arctic Ocean, they can only speculate. So far, they've only been able to study them closely in tanks, and one thing they can see is that the male doesn't waste much time with courtship. When he finds a female, he literally seizes the opportunity. What he's trying to do is put his arm inside her sac-like body cavity. This is something that's never been seen in the wild, and so any ideas about the reason for the long arm are just ideas. Maybe it anchors the male during the mating. Maybe it's a spoon for removing sperm from a previous male. Maybe it's a way of making absolutely certain that the rare encounters between these octopuses are successful. Whatever, this male finally does succeed. He deposits a small sac of sperm and withdraws. For her part, the female, having gotten the precious sperm, will now store it for about 5 months while her eggs develop. The story of every mother octopus is the ultimate in maternal devotion. Off the North American west coast, a giant Pacific octopus is cloistered in her den, tending her eggs. Several months ago, she laid between 10 and 20,000 of them, and she hasn't left the den since, not even to eat. The eggs hang overhead like great bunches of grapes, and she tends them, aerating them with bursts from her jet. And stroking them with her arms to remove algae. Inside the eggs are yolk sacs, which are food for the larvae during the 6 months before they hatch. What the mother lives on are her own internal tissues. As she broods the eggs, she digests herself, and by the time they hatch, she has wasted away. The babies go into the world with no further assistance. Giant octopuses are big, but nothing like the legendary monsters that could drag whole ships under. This probably never happened, but that doesn't mean there aren't giant squids in the sea. Dr. Clyde Roper has studied the evidence.
While many aspects of the giant squid still are very mysterious, they are no longer animals of mythology. And the reason is because we now have a number of specimens. The point is, we have never seen a live giant squid. What we know is from specimens that have been washed ashore, stranded on beaches, from the stomachs of their major predators, sperm whales, and also from fishermen's nets. It's like detective work, trying to put together little bits of information to learn about the giant squid. When we have these bits of information, we can put them together and make a model of a giant squid, such as this one in the Houston Museum of Natural Science. Giant squids truly are gigantic, huge animals. For example, the largest ever measured from tip of tail to tip of the tentacles is about 18 meters in total length. That's the length between the pitcher's mound and home plate on a baseball field. And the largest ones would weigh 1,000, perhaps even 2,000 pounds. We know enough now about their anatomy to understand that they're not such powerful creatures that they could destroy a submarine as the one in Jules Verne, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, almost did. Their eyes are really fascinating. They are the largest eyes in the animal kingdom, about the size of a volleyball. The reason is that these animals are deep sea animals. They live very deep, from 200 meters down to perhaps 1,000 or even more. The only light down at those depths comes from other animals that produce light, flashes and glows. These large eyes gather in the light, and the animal uses that to gather and capture their prey.
Since no one has ever seen a live giant squid, we can only imagine what they look like as they cruise the depths in search of food. People used to think giant squid attacked sperm whales because these deep divers were often found with big sucker marks on their mouths and heads. But analysis of the whale's stomach contents eventually revealed the reverse. They were eating the squid. But what actually does happen? The only way to find out is to go down and look. Scientists would have done this before, but only lately has there been the technology to explore the deepest parts of the ocean. A descent into a parallel planet Earth, unknown, unexplored, and absolutely dark. But there are more species of octopus and squid down here than there are in shallow waters. The cockatoo squid, whose way of holding its arms above its head makes it look like a parrot with a crest. A squid with long, ropey tentacles, which it uses as fishing lines. 7,500 feet down, and two ghostly white octopuses, a little one sitting on the head of a big one. Two different species? Or maybe a tiny male and an enormous female mating. No one knows yet. They've only just been seen.
Piggybacking octopuses. Mom and baby, is that kind of
Could be.
Deeper still, 9,000 feet. The cirrate octopus. It has paddle-like fins and arms that have turned into the ribs of an umbrella. It parachutes across the seabed on some mystery mission. Posturing, perhaps, or maybe collecting food in its net. Since there's no way for people to get out of these submarines and investigate the deep-sea animals firsthand, contact with them is a little blunt, but sometimes good enough. What does a cirrate octopus do when it's attacked? It sucks water into its net, touches the tips of its arms together, and turns into something like a pumpkin. A predator, at the very least, would be confused. No light from the sun ever reaches these ocean depths. And yet many of the creatures here do have eyes and use sight. That's because many of these creatures, including a lot of the squid, generate light of their own. Firefly squid. They live at a relatively shallow 1,200 feet, where there's still a slight glow from above. To disguise their silhouettes against this, they produce sparkling blue light. And when they spawn, they go near the surface, where they're commonly caught by fishermen. The blue flashes come from the tips of each squid's arms and could conceivably blind an attacker while the squid got away. Firefly squid are one of 700 species of squid, cuttlefish, and octopus that are known to exist. How many do exist is, of course, unknown, and only 100 of the known species have ever been seen alive. There's a lot left to discover about both the ones we don't know and the ones we do. These creatures are so unlike humans that sometimes you have to wonder how we could both inhabit the same planet. There's a fascinating journey ahead for those who follow these alien animals into their undersea world.
And Osa Johnson. As filmmakers, the Johnsons were less interested in documentation than sensational entertainment.
In the water, crocodiles are especially wicked. They will pounce upon the unfortunate victim of a capsized boat like a pack of wolves. We begin to feel uneasy lest one might charge the boat, and this surly monster does, almost upsetting us.
For all their showmanship, the Johnsons are recognized today as intrepid and talented filmmakers. Their movies, even with moments that now seem silly, were remarkable achievements.
It must have been incredible to go there with primitive cameras, primitive transportation, and how they actually got any material out of it, out of Africa at all, was a miracle. My first trip.
Wolfgang Bayer, who's photographed wildlife in all sorts of conditions all over the world.
Of all the animals that I filmed, I must say the primates are probably the most enjoyable ones. They are so much like us. Like the orangutans, we had to climb 150 feet tall trees in Borneo in order to go up in their environment. Everything else before has been filmed from the ground up. They were right above us, they peed on us. You know, I'm looking up there, and what are you going to do? You hang, you're totally helpless, and some orangutan decides to pee on you. And all you can do is just keep your head low and hope he doesn't do it too long. Chasing animals, over the years I've been bitten, scratched, attacked, and otherwise mutilated by coyotes, cougars, leopards, jaguars, baboons, chimpanzees, and of course numerous little creatures. Luckily nothing really poisonous. Nature and the animals give me so much enjoyment that, what the hell, a few bites and a few diseases and a few injuries here and there, not gonna kill me.
In In 1914, motion picture photography reached into a new realm, underwater. John Williamson, a cartoonist and photographer for a Virginia newspaper, had a showman's ingenuity and a father who'd built a 30-foot flexible steel tube designed for underwater salvage work. Williamson climbed down into the tube. Through the window of an observation chamber he called a photosphere, he took still photos in 1913. And in the next year, the first moving pictures ever taken underwater. What remained to be done, of course, was filming by a cameraman who swam freely underwater. An Austrian zoologist, Dr. Hans Haas, was among the first to try to connect diving and photography. In 1939, Dr. Haas filmed underwater scenes that enthralled audiences and fired the imagination of future divers. Has shot countless ocean documentaries and the underwater segments of features including James Bond movies and the deep. Doing so, he's amassed a vast library of underwater footage. But he's best known for his work with great white sharks, shooting them at first from inside a protective cage, later going outside the cage.
The first time out of the cage with a great white was certainly a ticklish experience. And I went out 6 or 8 feet and kept the cage at my back, and the first animal that came near, I lunged forward a bit, not totally convinced that he was going to move off, but it worked. And I continued to move further and further away from the cages, and eventually, the last time we were in Australia, I had 5 whites circling the cages and me, and I was 30, 40 feet away with animals swimming between me and the cages. You always have apprehension, but driven a bit by the hum of that camera and the spectacle, you take a calculated risk.
Giddings has taken his chances not only with the ocean's most fearsome creatures, but also with its most formidable places, like the hypnotically beautiful but perilous waters beneath the thick ice at the North and South Poles.
Diving the North Pole, and for that matter, Antarctica, I think represents the toughest diving that I've done anywhere in the world. The surface conditions, north and south, 60, 70 below zero. Water temperature 28.5. A canopy of ice over your head, in most cases 8, 9 feet thick. Antarctic diving is very, very, very tough. Tough on the gear, tough on the people. You're still concerned about bends. You're still concerned about all the problems of shooting and making images. But again, you're going through a hole that's 30 inches in diameter, 40 inches in diameter, and you've got a limited air supply, and you're on the bottom perhaps 40 minutes, and you know, you're gonna run out of gas, and you've got to find that exit hole. Arctic diving is also some of the most beautiful diving that I've done. It's really a fairyland of sorts. You have to be gutsy and you have to be motivated. The best ones are driven. They want to excel. They want to come back with images the likes of which no one's ever seen before.
camera goes to war. Each day it records the courage and heroism of our troops in battle. But rarely do you see the camera and the men behind it, who risk those same dangers to send back their stories and pictures.
In World War II, top filmmakers, including John Ford, John Huston, William Wyler, and Frank Capra, produced war documentaries working in Hollywood with battle footage shot by military and civilian cameramen. The amphibious invasion of the Pacific island of Tarawa in 1943, one of the bloodiest battles in the history of the U.S. Marine Corps.
This is the Army-Navy Screen Magazine Cutting Room, where combat film taken by Army, Navy, and Marine cameramen comes in from battlefronts all over the world. The Marine Staff Sergeant with the Expert Medal is 22-year-old Norman Hatch from Boston, Massachusetts.
When we went in on Tarawa, the only experience that anybody had had in the Marine Corps doing a war story on film was Guadalcanal, and that was almost nothing at all. And so consequently, when we got ready to go, it was sort of like an improv situation, you know? Everybody makes it up on his own.
We had the action covered with machine gun and rifle fire. The Japs kept coming out, trying to knock out the machine gun. There's a squad of them. A lot of good guys from the outfit weren't there anymore. I'm glad I got these pictures, because when you remember the roaches you've been fighting and the things they represented, and when you saw the flag go up and remembered the freedoms that flag stood for, you knew you were in on a good thing.
In 14 days,
Vietnam, a different war and a different breed of cameraman.
Cameraman Norman Lloyd, on assignment for CBS News, filmed and recorded these scenes when Bravo Company moved into a large communist bunker complex 6 miles north of the Vietnamese border.
Norman Lloyd from Australia was a school dropout, a kangaroo hunter, a bar fighter, a loner. He went to Vietnam on his own, replaced a CBS cameraman who was missing in action, and stayed 4 years. He won 2 Emmys and made a reputation for courage verging on craziness.
There was a lot of competition between the 3 networks for bang-bang footage. It was very important to get bang-bang footage. It was action. It was what they really wanted. The pressure coming from New York, there was a lot of pressure on people, on correspondents, on crews, if someone wasn't getting the story. And this led to deaths where people would do silly things because of the pressure on them, and they'd go out and they'd get killed, and this definitely happened, and other people were killed with him because of the pressure.
Norman Lloyd's countryman, Neil Davis, reported and filmed combat in Southeast Asia for 11 years. He was a legend among Vietnam cameramen, a master at covering combat. When Saigon fell, Neil Davis was there, filming the panicked attempt to escape the bloodbath expected when the North Vietnamese recaptured the city. Neil Davis chose not to escape. He stayed behind, awaiting the conquering army and making some of the most powerful images of the Vietnam War.
I didn't believe that there was a great danger as long as we survived the first few minutes of the communist occupation, where it's always very dicey, where there might be flare-ups and fighting immediately. Most people had left the streets. The civilian population had gone inside their houses and waited. I had decided the presidential palace was the place to be. And I went there alone and waited for them. And I thought I wasn't going to miss this end to the story. I had a moment's hesitation as the tank was approaching. And a man with a weapon, raced towards me, screaming in Vietnamese, "Stop, stop, stop." When I kept filming and we got quite close, and I rehearsed my bit before, which was in Vietnamese, "Welcome to Saigon, comrade. I've been waiting to film the liberation," and I had no qualms about that. I had it all right. And he said, "You're American." I said, "No, I'm not. I promise I'm an Australian, and I've been waiting for you." So he hesitated, and then some troops were coming out and surrendering from the palace. And he hesitated, then dismissed me and ran past, and I was able to then start filming again.
In 1985, Neil Davis was shooting a coup in the streets of Bangkok, a tame event compared to the heavy combat he'd survived so many times. But on this day, an exploding tank shell hit Davis and his crew. His camera, dropped on the pavement, was still rolling as he was dragged away. But he was dead, and his sound man died a few hours later.
Neil Davis was a guy that really had seen it all, and it was just a shame. After you see so many people get killed, after you see so many civilians get killed, after you see so many children get killed, you go a little insane. And I used to drink all the time. I thought of suicide a lot. It's taken years for me to get myself back together. But I do it again because I know that people have got to see what war is and what it means and the futility of it.
Mount Everest, a symbol of towering, irresistible challenge. Its grandeur has always inspired awe and noble effort. But Everest is also a killer. Over 80 climbers have died on it. Many more have come down broken and defeated. The summit was first reached in 1953, and then by a second expedition before an American team tried it in 1963. This team, 19 men, had a dual objective: to reach the summit, but also to film it, to create a documentary that would become the first National Geographic television special. The climbers were punished by Everest's devastating weather. Temperatures 20 below zero, winds blowing at more than 60 miles an hour. The altitude and cold induced nausea and headaches. The expedition's professional cinematographer, Dan Duty, was stricken with a nearly fatal blood clot. His climb was over, but lying in his tent, he taught a crash course in mountain cinematography to a pair of climbers who now got the job as movie makers. On May 1st, climber Jim Whittaker and the Sherpa, Gambu, reached the summit, planting an American flag, but taking only a few snapshots. Lute Gjerstad, with the movie camera, and his climbing partner, professional still photographer Barry Bishop, was still a long way from the top.
Climbing is scarcely the word for what they're doing now. They're barely creeping. 5 breaths to a step, then a rest. Then more steps, more breaths. Bodies aching, minds numb. Even with their flow of oxygen, they can barely breathe. They can barely move their leaden feet. But still they do move. On the morning of May 22nd, they launched the final push. As alone as 2 human beings can be on the face of the earth. And then, before them is a sight to lift the heart and bring tears to the eyes. After 3 weeks, Jim Whittaker's maypole still stands fast, with old glory streaming in the winds of space. These are the first moving pictures ever taken from the summit of Everest.
20 years later, David Brashears reached the summit and beamed a television picture to a satellite station for broadcast a week later on an American network. 25 years later, 1988, pictures from the summit were seen live on TV around the world. Thus, the dream of Captain John Noel was fully realized. Captain Noel, who carried the first movie cameras on Everest in the unsuccessful British expeditions of the early 1920s. His film continues to amaze mountaineering cameramen, not only for its clarity and coverage, but also his pioneering ordeal. He lugged heavy equipment. He developed the film himself on the spot, working in a mountainside tent, filtering glacier water, burning yak dung to provide heat to warm his chemicals. His film preserved the memory of the climb and made a legend of its tragic climax. Climbers George Mallory and Andrew Irvine struggling to within 600 feet of the summit before disappearing forever. Noel and the others watching through telescopes, then waiting anxiously as a search party led by Annie Odell went up. The emotion of that moment 64 years ago is still keenly felt by Captain Noel. He is 98 years old.
The top of the North Col was a shelf of ice. And Odell, when he'd made after 2 days and 2 nights that the men were dead, had just lost. He went up and he found the tent and he found these pieces of oxygen cylinder, and he came back and he gave us a message by signal. We had no wireless telephone in those days, they weren't known. He put a signal out of cross blankets. And the photograph I got, the best photograph I made in my life, was a circle made by the high-powered lens at 1.5 miles range, showing the cross blankets and showing the men walking away. And people asked me, what do you see? I couldn't tell them. I was overcome. I couldn't tell them that you get the signal. Their cross blankets meant Mary and Irving were dead.
Almost 30 years passed before men reached the top of Everest. Almost 40 years till Lute Gjerstad fulfilled Captain Noel's dream of moving pictures from the summit. Captain Noel, filming a heroic quest on a great mountain, was one of the first of his kind. As the era of the action film cameraman was just beginning, he embodied its bold and adventurous spirit and made a lasting contribution to the tradition of cameramen who dared.
To the dinosaurs. Most, like eagles and falcons, hunt during the day. But the owl can detect its prey at night, with a body designed to home in on a kill, even in complete darkness. Vultures are hunters too, though they prey on the dead. These voracious scavengers work together to strip the carcasses of large animals. For all their variety, birds of prey are savage and graceful, nature's monarchs of the air. Scotland in April, and a late snow covers the ground. A male golden eagle is hunting for food. Like other birds of prey, all the parts of his anatomy combine to create a highly efficient predator. Strong talons for grasping prey, a muscular chest, and powerful wings which help him lift it, and a sharp beak for tearing it open. These are the defining features of birds known as raptors. The golden eagle feeds mainly on rabbits, hares, and grouse, though it's strong enough to kill a deer calf. Golden eagles are among the largest birds of prey. They can measure 3 feet from beak to tail, with a wingspan of 7 feet. As in most birds of prey, the female is larger than the male. Along with hawks, falcons, kites, and buzzards, they are diurnal raptors, which means they hunt by day. High up on the sides of a Scottish cliff, golden eagles nest in an eyrie. The female is feeding her young. She tears the meat into small strips to make it easier for them to digest. However, the mother is unable to leave the nest to hunt. The thin down on newborn chicks provides little insulation, and they are vulnerable to the cold, so the mother must keep them warm by brooding. For the next 10 days, the whole family will rely on the hunting skills of the male. Birds of prey need patience, stealth, and above all, keen senses. Eagles rely on their sight. Unlike many birds, raptors have eyes which point forward, giving them binocular vision. By using both eyes to view the same object, they can see depth and are able to judge distances with great accuracy. They also have a third eyelid called a nictitating membrane, which protects their eyes, particularly when they attack. For centuries, people have known that birds of prey have good eyesight, hence the expression, eagle-eyed. But until 20 years ago, no one had tested their vision scientifically. Liz Raymond, an Australian research scientist, was the first to develop an eye test for eagles.
The biggest difficulty with testing any animal's vision is that you can't talk to them directly, so it all has to be done by indirect means.
Liz solved this problem with a simple but ingenious experiment. In the first stage, she trained an eagle to distinguish between images projected onto 2 screens.
They have 2 choices. One is the black and white line of equal widths, and the other one is a projection of a homogeneous grey field. And what you ask the eagle to do after a lot of training is to fly to the black and white lines, and if the bird does that, then he would receive a food reward.
Liz then made the black and white lines progressively thinner. The idea was to determine when the eagle could no longer distinguish the screen with the lines from the gray screen. At this point, the eagle wouldn't know which screen to fly to.
When he starts making the mistakes, or he's got 50% right and 50% wrong, then you can say that that's the actual limit of his resolving power.
Liz was then able to compare the eagle's eyesight with that of humans.
The results were quite surprising. If you hold your finger out, your thumbnail out about that distance, and if across your thumbnail you draw 60 black lines of equal widths and interdispersed with white lines of the same width, that's about the amount of detail that humans can resolve. But the eagle could see up to about 132 black lines, about 2.5 times as well as humans can see.
One of the reasons for their powerful vision is their large eyes. If our eyes were in the same ratio to our body size, they'd be as big as oranges. A big eye allows a larger image to be projected onto the retina at the back of the eye. This image is decoded for color and detail by light-sensitive receptors called cones. An eagle's retina has 600,000 cones per square millimeter, 4 times as many as in humans. But eagles' eyes are practically fixed in their sockets and can only be turned a few degrees. To compensate for this, the eagle's neck is incredibly flexible and can twist all the way around. Not all birds of prey have such powerful eyesight. Smaller raptors, like the kestrel, have smaller eyes, and their visual acuity is little better than ours. Despite this, kestrels can see things we can't. This is because they have specialized cones that can detect ultraviolet light. These help them find their favorite food, voles. Voles feed during the day. Hidden in the grass, they are difficult to see. But they have one weakness, their bladder. They leave a trail of urine wherever they go. Urine reflects ultraviolet light. And to a kestrel searching for food, these trails are perfectly visible from the air. This time, the vole escapes. As the light fades at the end of the day, diurnal raptors like the golden eagle give up the hunt. Their eyesight is adapted to work best in bright light. In low light, their vision is worse than ours, and they are unable to see their prey. When the moon rises, the nocturnal birds of prey come out to hunt. Barn owls are completely at home in the dark. They have all the features of the diurnal birds of prey, from their sharp talons to their strong beaks, but their eyes are different. In low light conditions, they are 100 times more sensitive than ours. Still, there are times when even a barn owl's eyes are not sensitive enough for hunting. The film in these canisters was the first photographic evidence that owls could hunt without any light at all. In 1957, Roger Payne of Cornell University carried out an unusual experiment.
I knew that owls had asymmetrical ears. The ears weren't the same on the two sides of the head. And that was curious. It meant ears were important to owls. I had to be doing something with them. So I put an owl on a perch in a darkened room, and I then released a mouse into leaves on the floor of the room. And the mouse, as it moved around, made noise, banging into the leaves and crushing them. And suddenly, in the darkness, the owl struck, and I turned on the lights, and it was holding the mouse. I just couldn't believe it. And later on, I got hold of an infrared viewing device, which makes it possible to look in infrared, which the owl can't see and we can't see. And then I could watch what was going on, and it was just fascinating.
Throughout the winter in a small shed on the campus, he used infrared light to watch barn owls hunt. He recorded what he saw on infrared film.
What we got to remember is that throughout this whole time, the owl can't see a thing. There's enough infrared to expose the film, but the owl can't see an infrared. But here he goes. He's flying along. He brings his feet into a pattern right there, which is exactly lined up with the mouse's body. He then closes his eyes because he knows he's about to hit something. He lands, and he's missed. The mouse is sitting right next to him, not 2 inches from his foot, but he can't see it. So he folds his wings. Ooh, and then he looks at the mouse because the mouse has just made a sound. And now he leans way forward. He's 6 inches from it. And at this moment, he does a curious thing. He brings his feet from the floor all the way up and puts them out like that because it's the only way he can line them up with what he's hearing. Here he goes. Wham, he nails it right there. Make sure that it wasn't that he was homing on the smell of the mouse, or that it had actually seen the mouse somehow, or that maybe it was looking at the mouse in the infrared heat that a mouse gives off. I took a small wad of paper, dragged that through leaves, and the owl struck the paper. The paper doesn't smell, it doesn't have any infrared coming off it, it doesn't look like a mouse to anybody, not even an owl, and the result is it had to be sound. Sound was what they were using.
At first sight, the barn owl doesn't appear to have ears at all, unlike its cousin, the long-eared owl. Looks, however, can be deceiving. The tufts are only for display. Its real ears, like the barn owl's, are hidden under the feathers alongside its eyes.
Everything about the way an owl looks, the reason an owl looks like an owl, is all to do with acoustic adaptations. In other words, adaptations for hearing. One of the most obvious ones is this circle of feathers around both sides of the head. Actually, this is one parabola to collect sound for this ear, and this is another parabola to collect sound for that ear, which is actually very much like cupping your hand behind your ear as a means of collecting more sound. And you can also see another peculiar thing. Owls sit with their bills pointed down like this, looking at the world. And the reason they do is to maximize the surface area over which they can collect sound. If this was a robin or some other bird, songbird, the bill would be held roughly horizontally like that. But no, they tilt it way down. And the reason they do that is because this dimension of the head is greater than that dimension of the head. That whole posture is part of why an owl looks like an owl.
The barn owl locates the direction of a sound in 2 ways. When the mouse makes a noise, the sound reaches one ear a fraction of a second before it arrives at the other. This minute time difference enables the owl to work out the left-right direction of the mouse. When the mouse is directly in front of the owl, The sound arrives at both ears at exactly the same time. Now it has to calculate if the mouse is above or below.
If you cut just that collection of feathers in the very center here that help the air flow by smoothly, then you get what we've done here to this owl, which is a stuffed owl that's had just those feathers removed, nothing else. So right here you can see that there are two flaps of skin, and those flaps are directly in front of the ear opening. The ear opening is back here. But they're asymmetrically placed. One is higher than the other one. This one is actually lower than that one.
These asymmetric flaps gather the sound from the mouse in different ways. The noise of rustling leaves comes from below the owl. The sound passes under the high flap, which is on the left side of the owl's head, and is reflected by the ruff into the ear. The low flap on the right side deflects the sound coming from below. When the sound is louder in the left than the right ear, the owl knows it's coming from below. By combining the up-down with the left-right information, it pinpoints the mouse with great precision. The mouse, however, has ears of its own. If it hears the owl coming, it can simply run away.
There's a fight between owls and mice. Mice have ways to avoid owls. Owls have ways to improve their chances of catching a mouse, and this is one of them. The very leading edge of the feather that is in the front on the wing has a little series of tiny little spikes that stick out on it.
No other bird of prey has these spikes. The leading edge of an eagle's wing is smooth. As the eagle flies, its wings cut through the air, creating turbulence. This turbulence creates large sound waves, making it noisy in flight. When an owl flies, the tiny spikes on its wings break down the air into smaller spirals called microturbulence. This makes the flight of the owl quieter. Sharp hearing also helps an owl hunting in daylight. The great gray owl lives in northern latitudes, and in the winter months, its prey is hidden beneath a blanket of snow. But the snow offers no real protection. Even through this covering, the owl can detect the sound of a mouse eating. The great gray owl, like all birds of prey, has senses finely adapted to its environment. Turkey vultures ranging over the rainforests of South America can't see their food either. The dense canopy of trees covering the ground hides animal carcasses from view. So how these scavengers were able to locate food remained a mystery until the late 1930s. In California, the Union Oil Company was plagued by a leak in a 42-mile-long natural gas pipeline. The leak proved impossible to find in difficult terrain. But company engineers had noticed that vultures often gathered while they were repairing holes in other pipelines. So on a hunch, the engineers from the gas company traveled along the pipeline. Eventually, they saw turkey vultures circling in the distance. When they reached the spot, they started digging. To help find pipeline leaks, a gas with a distinctive smell of rotting meat is always added to natural gas. It was this that attracted the vultures. At the bottom of the hole, the engineers found the broken pipe. They had also discovered that turkey vultures could hunt just by smell. Turkey vultures have nostrils so large, you can see right through them. Smells are processed by a very large olfactory bulb at the front of the brain. The bulb is so sensitive, it enables the bird to detect the direction a smell is coming from. The turkey vulture follows the concentration of odors in the air to the source of the smell. This acute sense provides a service to other vultures. While the turkey vulture flies low over the forest canopy, the other vultures soar high above, waiting and watching. These birds have a less developed sense of smell and rely on the turkey vulture to guide them to the food. When it descends, they follow. Although first to the prey, the turkey vulture isn't strong enough to rip through the skin of this large rodent. It is soon joined by black vultures, which are also unable to pierce the hide. They must wait for the arrival of the king vulture. Like the black vultures, the king vulture has a weaker sense of smell, but it does have a strong, sharp beak. It repays the favor of being led to the meal by tearing through the skin of the carcass to provide food for all. Back in Scotland, it is May. The newborn golden eagle chicks are now 7 weeks old. They still need feeding twice a day, but now they can be left alone on the Erie. They've now acquired a thick layer of downy feathers and no longer depend on their mother for warmth. The feathers to come, however, will take them much further. A typical bird of prey has over 7,000 feathers, each with its own role. Some insulate the bird from the cold, others waterproof it from the rain. And then there are those that provide lift for flying. Before a bird flies, it raises and untangles its feathers, putting each one into place, ready for flight. Flight is a bird's ultimate evolutionary achievement. The evolution of birds is still the subject of fierce scientific debate. The earliest ancestors of birds probably emerged 200 million years ago as reptiles. Some that climbed trees grew elongated scales to form primitive wings. These allowed them to glide from the treetops. 50 million years later, Archaeopteryx appeared. It still had teeth and solid bones, just like a reptile. But what made this animal so different was that it had feathers. Like scales, feathers are made from keratin, but they are light and flexible. Archaeopteryx did more than glide. It could fly. Flight improved over the next 75 million years as every possible ounce was trimmed from what were now the birds. To save weight, they even lost their teeth. Bones became hollow, strengthened with a honeycomb of trusses. About 50 million years ago, as the number of rodents and small mammals began to increase, birds appeared that could hunt this rich food supply. The modern bird of prey was born.
Eagle 01, Lake Tower, wind 1605, cleared for takeoff, change to departure.
Eagle 01, cleared for takeoff, change to departure.
Air bases throughout the world have a problem. The short grass around an airfield attracts flocks of hungry birds. Just one bird flying into the engine of a jet can cause it to crash. The most dangerous time is when planes are coming in to land.
War Dog 3-1, clear to land runway 24, wheels down.
And War Dog 3-1, expect possible go-around short final. We have a small flock of birds crossing the runway left to right. Approach in. Bird Control 1, Lake and Heath ground.
Ground, go ahead, please.
The U.S. 48th Fighter Wing, based in England, keeps peregrines and other falcons on standby.
Bird Control 1, we need you to proceed out to runway 24 at the approach end. We have a small flock of birds sitting on the runway approach end.
Peregrines are the natural enemy of the rooks and pigeons that feed near the runways. A tape recording of a distressed bird is often not enough to scare the flock. But the release of a peregrine has a dramatic effect. First, it climbs to gain altitude. Then it launches its attack with a steep dive called a stoop. A peregrine falcon in a stoop is the fastest animal in the world. A team in Germany has measured its speed at 217 miles per hour. The point is only to scare the birds, but this time it catches a passing pheasant. A peregrine's strong wings are designed for maneuverability, but it depends on speed to catch its prey in the air. The wings power the bird forward at over 4 beats a second. An eagle's wings are not designed for speed. Their shape and 7-foot span enable them to soar over vast areas in search of prey on the ground. But one thing the eagle and the peregrine have in common with other birds of prey is that they strike with their feet. Each foot is armed with 4 talons, which pierce skin like daggers. On the eagle, they can be over 2 inches long. When they grasp their prey or a branch, raptors have a special locking mechanism in their legs that prevents their grip from slipping. It works like a ratchet. As their toes grasp, ridges on the tendons lock the talons into place. When it wants to let go, the bird pulls the outer sheath away from the tendon, and the grip is released. In New Mexico, the talons of the red-tailed hawk will find an easy target. As the sun goes down, Mexican free-tailed bats stream out of their cave to start a night of feeding. The red-tailed hawk normally hunts rabbits, but it will also take bats, and it doesn't pay to be choosy. Raptors eating their prey have the skills of an experienced butcher. A hungry eagle can strip the bones of a rabbit in 15 minutes. Birds of prey are fast eaters. On the ground, the peregrine is vulnerable to predators, so it needs to eat quickly. It swiftly plucks the feathers of this pheasant to get at the flesh below. Each species has a beak that is specialized and finely adapted to the prey it feeds on. An eagle's beak has a sharp hook at the end, able to cut into meat like a knife point. And the sides of the beak have razor-sharp edges to tear flesh away from the carcass. In the Florida Everglades, one species of kite has a beak adapted to only one food source. The snail kite feeds on apple snails. Its thin, curved beak is so well designed to prise a small snail out of its shell that the snail kite doesn't eat anything else. While larger birds of prey eat their food where they find it, smaller raptors, like owls, carry their catch to somewhere safe. A raptor's digestive system, with its specialized gastric juices, is designed to deal with its exclusive diet of meat. Even as young chicks, barn owls swallow their prey whole. Then the owls use an internal organ to separate the meat from the bones and fur. Instead of teeth to break up the food, owls have a gizzard, a muscular stomach that grinds up the food. The meat is digested by acids, and the bones and fur are molded into pellets and regurgitated. Dissecting a pellet reveals the owl's diet. In a typical week, it will eat 12 voles, 14 mice, and 8 shrews. In Scotland, it is now 11 weeks since the young eagles hatched. This down feather is all that's left of the bird's juvenile coat. Their black and white flight feathers have grown, and the birds are just mature enough to fly. The parents are starting to leave the young birds to fend for themselves. If they don't fly soon, they'll starve. These first flaps are essential preparation for flight. They build up muscles and strengthen the wings. The eldest chick finally gets up the courage to take to the air. This maiden flight ends with an ungainly landing. For any bird of prey, the first year is the toughest in its life. Over half will die in their first 12 months, mainly due to starvation. To survive, these birds will now need to find sites where they can hunt and breed. Zoologist Mike McGrady has spent 5 years studying eagles in the Western Highlands of Scotland. He's used tracking techniques to build the most detailed picture yet of the movements a young eagle makes once it has left the nest.
For the first few months after it leaves the nest, it is resident on its natal territory. But after, in usually, November through January, they move on and start to wander quite widely. These wanderings can be over hundreds of kilometers, and they don't seem to have any direction.
To follow these wanderings, Mike fits the eagles with radio transmitters. But he has to catch one first. "80 yards from the hide, Mike has baited the trap with a dead rabbit. Trapping requires endless patience.
It's kind of a dynamic tension between being comfortable and being uncomfortable, because you have to be awake all the time, pretty much, but and ready to move. But you also, if you're going to have to spend 11 hours in this hide and it's cold or raining or something like that, you also try to make yourself comfortable.
This is the 6th day of watching and waiting. When he does spot an eagle flying overhead, there's no guarantee it will be tempted by the bait. And even if it is, Mike's problems may have just begun.
We then have to wait until the eagle is exactly in the right position, because one is always concerned that the eagle will be injured by our trapping methods. But once the eagle is in position, we just fire the trap by radio control. Unfortunately, sometimes the eagles spend half an hour in the wrong position, but in the trap, and we never catch them.
Although the bird is in position, it isn't safe to spring the trap while its wings are open. Finally, it folds its wings.
Okay, the ring number is ZZ0832.
0832.
Yeah, let me just get a bill length on it.
The first job is to tag the bird and measure it. The beak and talon lengths will tell Mike whether this is a male or a female.
Okay, 43.2.
Although trapped, it is still a formidable animal. This bird has a short beak and talons, and so Mike knows it's a male.
All right, we're ready to put the tag on.
He fits the lightweight radio transmitter that will eventually detach itself from the bird.
This is a tail-mounted transmitter, so its life expectancy is really dependent upon where the tails, how long that tail feather is going to stay in. I've tried to choose a feather that's relatively new, because eagles don't molt through all their feathers in one particular year. So hopefully this bird will be able to keep the transmitter on at least as long as the life of the transmitter, which might be about 2 years.
There are about 450 breeding pairs of eagles in Scotland. To be successful, a young golden eagle needs to claim a territory. But what if all the good sites are already taken? Today, Mike's picked up the signal of a young male eagle and followed it to its source. The territory of this golden eagle is 7 miles long and 5 miles wide. The eagle has defended it against all comers.
Just like any other territorial animal, they maintain this territory at great sort of energetic expense. And the reason they have to do that is because the resources within that territory are quite important to it breeding. Those resources include food resources, but also might include nesting resources or a mate. They're maintaining an area which they can survive and reproduce in. The other eagles are also interested in the same thing, and if you have an eagle that's non-territorial and is looking to enter the breeding population, it has to establish itself on a territory. And at least from our work, some of these eagles seem to be aggressive about that territory establishment.
Mike has recently discovered just how aggressive eagles can be. In 1992, he tagged the male of a pair of breeding eagles. He tracked the bird for 1.5 years until he eventually lost contact.
Some months later, we picked up a very strong signal on this bird and followed the signal in to find the bird dead and quite decomposed.
What he discovered next came as a complete surprise.
Once we cleaned up the skull and the whole skeleton, we sort of realized what had caused this bird to die. It had obviously received a wound from probably another eagle. Must be another eagle. I can't imagine anything else inflicting a wound like that on an adult golden eagle.
This eagle was killed for its territory. How often this occurs, no one knows, but a young male eagle has now taken over the territory. Chances are, this was the killer. The new young male will mate with a resident female. He will learn from her where the best hunting sites are and benefit from her experience. When she dies, he will stay in the territory and acquire a new mate. In this way, territories have been handed down in an unbroken lineage, stretching back centuries. All birds of prey share an evolutionary legacy. Whether they're hunting or scavenging, flying or gliding, they are the ultimate aerial predators.
And this one lady stepped out of the group. All of a sudden, she came, and I had to jump in front of this lady, swung at her, and she backed off. Somehow, she did a 360-degree turn in the air, landed on me, tried to bite my head. I then threw her off, and she managed to scratch me on my shoulder, on my back, and also
Can we see that?
white mark. Yeah.
These scars show just how razor-sharp leopard claws can be. Chris has painful puncture wounds where Bagheera tried to lock onto his shoulder. She then used hindpaws to claw into his back, where she almost opened up his kidney. A split second later, and Chris would have been one ex-ranger.
And I know she still wants you.
Yeah, she still wants to play with me.
Yeah. There's play and then there's play, right?
Yeah, then there's play.
It's great to see such a powerful animal close up, but to understand their true behavior, I need to find a wild one and an expert to help me. Chris is up for it, and we're off for a nighttime safari. Leopards tend to be active at night because it's cooler, and they can sneak around virtually unnoticed. But there are two things that can give them away. First of all, eye shine. And secondly, an animal carcass stashed in a tree. That's a leopard's larder. There's our wild leopard. It's used its huge shoulder muscles to drag an antelope up in a tree to protect it from scavengers. Like hyenas. The treetop makes a perfect feeding platform and lets the leopard eat in peace. Other big cats spend a lot of time defending their kills. Although leopards are secretive cats, they do come into contact with people. But just how likely is that to happen? Let's find out in Dummy Jules' first experiment.
We're going to try and get a leopard inside this tent. We're going to bait the body of Dummy Jules with some meat and leave the flap of the tent open. Now, by leaving the flap of the tent open, you have left the body extremely vulnerable to leopard attack. Now, as you can see, we've got Dummy Jules, one camera, and the wide open entrance. You'll see any leopard come right in here, hopefully grab the dummy. And the best view of all will be you guys up there. You can see the whole thing, including Dummy Jules, including a leopard.
Time to get the tent in place, and we're back exactly where we saw the wild leopard 2 days ago. Dummy Jules is not looking happy. A few last-minute adjustments, but we'll have to be quick. We can't take any risks, especially with fresh meat lying around. And that's where we're going to keep safe in an enclosed vehicle. Imagine Dummy's had a big lunch. He's retired to his tent and left the door open for the breeze. It's late afternoon and the temperature's dropped. Leopards are already on patrol. Leopards might be secretive cats, but this one's not afraid of our car. What will it make of the tent? Like a domestic cat, it's curious but careful. This could be a trap. This is the only chance to zip up the door, if you're awake. If you weren't awake before, ouch, you would be now. Hang on, there's something strange here. This cat's not interested in eating. I think this is a female in heat. Ouch, that's one dangerous love bite. It seems Dummy can't satisfy her needs, and she's out of there. Lucky Dummy, very lucky. She didn't attack, but equally she didn't show any signs of fear. Today there were no casualties, but 2 years ago a South African leopard attacked 2 cyclists in broad daylight and went on to maul 4 other people. Some leopards are simply not afraid of humans, houses, tents or vehicles. These cats are highly unpredictable, and the odds happen to be in Dummy Jules' favor. This time.
Now you have to remember this is our experiment with one leopard. But what we have learned today, that if you leave your tent open, they will come in. So just remember, when you're on safari, zip it up.
Our next dangerous animal is the elephant. Can you imagine being on the wrong side of one of these? Daryl Balfour, wildlife photographer, can.
Well, I was working on an elephant book, photographing elephants of Africa.
Yeah.
And having to be on foot photographing the elephant called Chokwan. I walked up to him, took a sequence of shots, and eventually finished the shoot. And you know that typical photographer's thing, there's all those one better shots, and as I was walking away, I turned back, and Chokwan had gone back to feeding on some occasions.
Yeah.
And I thought, better light, better shots. Let's just go back and...
That one last shot.
One last shot.
Yeah.
Suddenly he spun around, gave a short trumpeting blast, then just lowered his head, screamed once, just a short, and put his head down and came at me. And I couldn't focus anymore. I scrambled to my feet and turned to run. And he lashed out with his trunk. He hit me a really solid blow, knocked me down. I ended up sprawled on the ground, and before I could even think of crawling or doing anything, he was right on top of me, and there's just these huge tree trunk-like legs, stomping and kicking, and it was mayhem. He then came at me with his tusks. My last recollection was lying there, and these two huge tusks coming straight at my face. And he hit me a glancing blow on the side of my head, fractured my skull, and knocked me unconscious. He kept on kicking me around and trying to kneel down, because elephants, as you know, kneel down and then use the base of the trunk.
Do a little sandwich into the ground there.
And because his tusks were so long, every time he tried to kneel, the tusk dug in the ground. So there were these huge gouge marks in the ground where my body had been lying.
It's lucky it was hard ground here.
So that's what saved my life.
So what turns a giant vegetarian like an elephant into a potential killer?